first, he had whimpered, barked, tugged at the rope till his throat ached. But time had robbed him of his strength. His sturdy legs quaked below him. His fur, once thick and fluffy, now hung in matted patches over his gaunt body. The wind howled through the empty road, the leaves at his feet rustling in its wake. Story comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. But he didn't move. He couldn't. The person who had left him here didn't intend for him to survive. And worst of all, maybe they were right. The discovery. Miles away, Emily buckled her seatbelt, her fingers drumming nervously against the dashboard. The rescue team had spent the day searching for animals that were lost or abandoned. So far, nothing. Let's call it a night, Jason sighed, rubbing his eyes as he left his hands on the wheel. Emily sighed, looking out at the darkening sky. She hated this part, the giving up. But then, something flickered in her peripheral vision. A shadow, by the side of the road, something still, something waiting. Stop the car. Before Jason could even respond, Emily was already reaching for the door handle. The truck rolled to a stop, wheels crunching over gravel. Emily stepped outside, and her chest seized up, because now that she was near, she could see it. A dog tied to a tree. A tinny sibilance escaped with each breath, the streetlight above swinging a long fading shadow over his skeletal figure. His head hung low. His ears barely twitched. Emily's breath hitched. He was still alive. But just barely. The hands of the woman were scurrying forward in order to get the rope embedded in the neck of her husband untied. But then she stopped. Something cold grazed her fingers. A collar. Emily's pulse spiked. There was something that went along with it. A metal tag. Jason stepped up behind her. What does it say? Emily gulped, heart pounding as she flipped over the tag. And the moment she read the inscription, her blood froze. Jason must have seen the way the color drained from her face. Emily! She took a shaky breath. Then she read the words aloud. Do not take me. He's coming back for me. Silence. The trees rustled with whispers of wind. The cold air hugged them like a caution. Jason's heart pounded in his chest. Emily's fingers closed around the collar. And the old dog? He just closed his eyes, like he already knew that nobody was to save him. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Emily's hand shook around the metal tag. The letters carved deep, jagged, as if whoever wrote them had done so in desperation. Jason exhaled a long breath next to her. His voice was little above a whisper. Emily? What the fuck does that even mean? She didn't answer, because she didn't know. The old dog lay still, his body hardly rising and falling with his feeble breaths. Jason kneeled next to her, his eyes scanning the dog's fragile body. His coat was matted and filthy, but there were no obvious signs of a fight. No bite marks, no scratches, no sign that he had been attacked or abandoned in a panic. This wasn't simply a case of someone abandoning their pet. Someone had intentionally tied him here, and they believed they would return. The decision. Emily could feel her pulse beating in her skull, the urge to run quickly, get him out of here, this is not happening. Now still the words on the collar rang in her head. Do not take me. A dark, eerie sensation slithered up her back, as if they were violating a rule they didn't know. Jason got to his feet, dragging a hand down his face. All right, we're not simply abandoning him here. His voice was firm, confident, but Emily sensed something in his tone. Hesitation. because while everything reasonable within them told them taking the dog was the right move, something didn't feel quite right. Jason pulled out his pocket knife and squatted to slice the thick rope around the dog's neck. The instant that blade hit the fibers, the dog's eyes snapped open. Emily gasped. Jason jumped back as though about to fall. The old dog was watching them, not in fear, not in pain, but in warning. Emily felt her heart crash against her ribs. The dog's body was still weak, the creature barely able to support its own weight. But those eyes, there was something in those eyes, something pleading, like he was trying to say, don't do this. But it was too late. In one smooth motion, Jason cut the rope. The dog collapsed. His legs gave way entirely, his body crashing to the ground. Emily charged forward, hovering her hands as she felt for his breath. Still there, barely. "We've got to get him to the truck," Jason said, starting to pick him up. Emily hesitated. The moment Jason released the rope, the atmosphere had changed. The trees seemed taller, the shadows deeper. The wind that had been blowing sawdust like a tornado now ceased altogether, as if the forest itself was bearing its breath. Emily swallowed hard. "Yeah," she whispered. "Let's go." Now, the road back. The truck barreled down the desolate, dark road, its headlights slicing through the never-ending pitch. Jason drove without a word, the grip on the wheel tighter than normal. Emily was in the passenger seat, looking back every few seconds at the dog in the back. He had his legs folded under him on the seat, breathing shallowly, eyes almost closed. But the feeling that he was still watching was one Emily couldn't shake. "You okay back there, buddy?" she murmured. The dog didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. Jason sighed, rolling the tension out of his neck. "This whole thing is screwed up," he mumbled. "Who the hell just puts a dog like that outside?" Emily had been wondering the same thing, and whoever it was, they hadn't wanted him to die. If they had, they would not have left food. But they hadn't wanted him gone either. They left him there for a reason. Emily curled her fingers against her lap. "We need to have him checked out," she said. "See if he's chipped. Maybe there's a—" Bang! The truck jerked violently. The tires screeched against the pavement and Emily's breath caught. Jason slammed the brakes. "What the hell?" The truck lurched again, not from a flat tire, not from some animal in the road, from something below them. Emily's stomach twisted. The dog lifted his head. His ears perked. His body stiffened, and then he growled. Low, deep, not at them, at something outside. Jason slammed the truck into park, his hands shaking as he let reach for the door handle. "Don't!" Emily could barely speak above a whisper. Jason froze. The dog's growl grew louder, more urgent. Emily didn't know how she knew. She just knew. "No matter what you do," she whispered, her breath trembling, "do not open that door." Jason's face paled. He began to lose his grip on the handle. Outside, the road was silent, but for the first time since they had left the forest, Emily swore she saw movement in the darkness, and she finally realized they weren't alone. Emily was preoccupied with what the caller had read. That was why the truck sat dead in the middle of the empty road, headlights glossing against the slick asphalt. The world outside seemed too quiet. Jason's hand gripped the door handle, knuckles white. Emily could barely breathe. The dog was growling. Not the kind of growl that signaled fear, the kind that meant warning. Something was out there, watching, waiting. Jason's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Emily, what do you see?" Emily's throat was dry. She didn't want to answer, because she did not know how to describe what she was seeing. The road in front of them was clear. The shadows in the tree line, though, they were moving, not bending like trees in the breeze, not threading like animals through the underbrush. They were watching. Emily swallowed hard. "We need to go." Jason hesitated. "But what if—" "Jason, drive!" Her voice was sharp, final. Jason didn't argue. His hand trembled as he inserted a key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, then died. Emily's stomach dropped. Jason turned the key again. Click, click, click. Nothing. Jason swore under his breath. "You've got to be kidding me." Emily turned toward the dog. His body was stiffened, his blue-gray muzzle raised a bit, lips barely drawn back to show his teeth. His eyes, those weary, tired eyes, weren't on them. They were locked onto the side mirror. Emily followed his gaze. And that's when she saw it. A shadow, tall, motionless, right behind the truck. Emily's breath hitched. "Jason!" Jason froze. He didn't ask questions. He didn't turn. He didn't need to, because he felt it too. His fingers floated over the key. He tried one last time. The truck roared to life. The dog barked, loud, urgent. Jason didn't hesitate. He popped his foot on the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement as the truck lurched forward, so violently Emily was pushed back into her seat. Jason didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't ask questions. They were leaving there, yet Emily couldn't quite get rid of the sense that they weren't going fast enough. The gas station. 20 minutes later, the first signs of civilization appeared. A solitary gas station, its fluorescent lights buzzing weakly in the night. Jason had pulled in without really thinking. The instant he parked the truck, he took in a harsh breath, pausing his forehead against the wheel. Emily was still shaking her hands. The dog, he hadn't taken his eyes off the mirrors. Jason faced her, his voice hoarse. What the hell was that? Emily didn't know, but the air still felt wrong. She inhaled slowly, trying to get her fingers to stop shaking. They needed answers. "We need to look for a microchip," she said. Jason blinked. "What?" "The dog. If he has a chip, we can determine where he originated. Maybe even who brought him there." Jason hesitated, but finally he nodded. "Fine, but let's do it fast. This is not where I want to be longer than we have to." Emily opened the door and stepped into the cold night air. The gas station was virtually empty, save for the attendant behind the counter, an older man, thin, sunken eyes. He was staring at them already. Emily hesitated. There was something about him that felt off. Jason nudged her forward. "Come on, the quicker we do this, the faster we get out of here." Emily gulped hard and stepped inside. The bell overhead jingled sharply. The man didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. Emily cleared her throat. "Hey, do you guys own a scanner? For microchips?" The man didn't answer immediately. He just stared. He was, and then slowly, he leaned forward. When he spoke, his voice was raspy. "You have to take that dog back to where you found him." Emily's stomach dropped. Jason stiffened. "What did you just say?" The man's eyes were glued on them. He was not supposed to leave that tree. Silence. Emily's heart beat loudly in her ears. "What do you mean?" she whispered. The man finally blinked, and when he spoke again, he had a flat voice. Emotionless. "He's coming for him." Jason's hands balled into fists. "Who?" A slow, strange smile passed over the man's lips, and then he pointed, not at Emily, not at Jason, at the dog. Emily turned. The husky was shaking, his body low to the ground, his ears pinned back, not in fear, in recognition. Emily felt her breath catch in her throat, because the look in his eyes, he already knew. Whoever he was already coming. These words hung in the air, thick and stifling. Emily's chest tightened. The gas station seemed smaller, the fluorescent lights above buzzing like insects in a web. Jason's fists clenched at his sides. His whole body was taut, prepared for either fight or flight. He just hadn't decided which yet. Emily willed herself to speak, to force back the fear scraping at her throat. "What do you mean?" she said, her heartbeat slower than she felt. The old man behind the counter simply smiled. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't kind. It was knowing. As though he had been waiting for the moment, like he had been anticipating them. "You shouldn't have taken him," the man rasped. Emily's stomach twisted. Jason stepped forward, jaw tightened. "Who's coming?" The man's blurry eyes had settled downward, to the dog. The husky hadn't moved. He was still squatting low, ears pinned back, muscles locked. Not just in fear, in anticipation. Emily swallowed hard. "Please," she tried again. "If you know something, tell us. We just discovered him all roped up in the forest. We couldn't just—" The man cut her off. "You don't get it, do you?" Jason tensed. "Get what?" And then the man leaned forward. His voice was softer now. "That dog was never astray." Silence. Ava's heart leaped into her mouth. Jason's face darkened. "What do you mean?" The man released a breath, his eyes darting to the dark road outside. And then he said something that froze Emily's blood. He wasn't just left tied there. He was tied there to prevent something else from leaving. A chill ran down Emily's spine. Jason scoffed. "That doesn't make no damn sense." But deep down, Emily knows it does, because the moment they cut the rope, everything had shifted. The air had shifted. The world had felt off. And now they were standing in a gas station in the middle of nowhere, listening to an old man say they had just released something. The husky whimpered. A low, sorrowful sound. Emily instinctively reached forward, fingers running through his fur. His body was ice cold. The man shook his head. "If you're asking for my advice," he muttered, "take that dog back to the place where you got him. Now, before it's too late." Jason let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, and what if we don't?" The man's eyes darkened. "Well, then I hope you're ready for him." The decision. They drove out of the gas station, no more words. Emily's mind was racing. Jason was fuming. "That dude was crazy," Jason mumbled as he slid back into the driver's seat. "Our talking like this is some horror movie. Take him back." "Right, and leave him to die? Not happening." Emily didn't respond, because she felt unsure that Jason had been right. She looked at the dog curled in the back seat. His breath was still shallow, his body still weak. But the way he'd looked at the gas station attendant, the way his whole body seized up at the sound of the man's voice, he understood. He knew what was coming. Jason cranked the ignition key. The truck rumbled to life. "We are going to the vet," Jason said sternly. "Get him checked out. If it's got an owner, we locate them. If we don't, we decide where to go next. But we are not—" Bang! Something hit the side of the truck. Emily screamed. Jason jerked the wheel. The husky snarled, his body snapping upright. Emily turned in her seat, her pulse pounding. Nothing. There was nothing there. Jason was panting, his fingers so tightly wrapped around the wheel, his knuckles had gone pale. "What the hell was that?" he growled. Emily didn't know. But when she looked at the dog, her stomach sank. His eyes, those bright, glassy blue eyes, were wide with recognition, as if he were somehow prepared for it. Jason's breathing was uneven. He placed the truck in drive. "Screw this," he muttered. "We're leaving." Emily's throat was dry. She wanted to believe that they could, that this was mere coincidence, that they weren't being tracked. But deep down, she knew they were. The words of the old man reverberated in her head. He's coming for him. Emily looked out the window at the vacant road disappearing into the night, and for the first time all night, when they saved him, she wondered if they had done the right thing, because perhaps he wasn't the one who needed saving. Perhaps he was holding something else back from escaping, and now they had set it free. Emily sat stiff in the passenger seat with shallow breath and fingers working the fabric of her jeans. Jason gripped the wheel as the truck rattled down the dark, deserted road, his jaw tight. They had barely left the gas station parking lot when something they could not see, had slammed into the side of the truck. But when they looked, there was nothing there, no footprints, no sign of movement. Just a vacant highway and the pressure of being watched. The husky remained tense, his body folded into the back seat and his breathing shallow. Emily glanced at him. He hadn't taken his eyes away from the side mirror, like he was waiting. Jason exhaled sharply. "This is insane. We're going to the vet. We're figuring this out. That old man was full of shit." Emily wasn't so sure. She knew what she felt. And she felt wrong, like something was broken, like the rules had changed the instant they untied the rope. Her fingers clenched more tightly in her lap. "Jason." Jason shook his head. No what-ifs, no second-guessing. "It's a dog, Emily, a scared, abandoned dog. We saved him. That's what we were meant to do." Emily didn't answer, because deep down, she didn't know if that was true. The first sign trees lined the road, stretching as far as the eye could see, barren branches that looked like spare bones. Jason pressed harder on the gas, but Emily could sense it now. He was nervous. The air in the truck was fraught, the world outside too quiet. Emily's fingers twitched, and then the first sign popped up. A road sign, bent, rusted, covered in vines, and on it a single word, "Warning." Emily's stomach dropped. "Jason, I see it," he muttered. He didn't slow down. Emily turned and watched the sign recede behind them. A warning for what? And why did it seem like it was meant for them, the second sign? They kept driving. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. Emily wasn't sure anymore. Time felt wrong. And then, the second sign. Another rickety pole, dimly seen in the headlights. Another single word. "Turn back." Emily's throat tightened. Jason's knuckles whitened against the wheel. He didn't say anything, didn't slow down. But Emily noticed it, how his fingers quivered. The way that his breathing was different, they both knew. They were past the gas station. They had driven for miles, but the air felt heavier. The world outside darker, and worst of all, Emily was beginning to have the sickening sense that they weren't going anywhere. Like the road was uncoiling, twisting, holding them in. Jason exhaled sharply. "We're almost there." But the second he said it, the truck lurched, the headlights flickered, and Emily's stomach dropped. Because standing in the road was the third sign. This time, not a single rusty letter. No cryptic warnings, but just something scratched into the wood, something fresh, something that hadn't existed there before. Emily's breath hitched. Jason swerved to avoid it. And when the headlights swept over the sign, she could finally make out what it said. Carved deep into the wood, "He's awake!" The truck veered. Emily screamed. Jason yanked on the wheel, too hard, too fast. The truck spun out, and then everything went black. The accident. Emily gasped awake. Smoke filled the air. Her head throbbed. The truck was in the ditch sideways. The front bumper crunched against the trunk of a tree. Jason slumped over the wheel, groaning. Emily blinked furiously, her vision hazy, her ears ringing. And then she remembered the sign, the words, "He's awake." Emily's pulse spiked. The husky. She twisted in her seat and froze, because the back seat was empty. The dog was gone. Emily's chest tightened. Breathless, she kicked the door wide and fell onto the damp ground. Her vision swam. Her ears were still ringing. "Jason!" she choked out. Jason groaned and raised his head. What? What happened? Emily wasn't listening, because in the distance, something stirred. Her breath hitched. A shadow, a shape, just outside the tree line. Not running, not hiding, watching. Emily's pulse pounded. And then a sound, low, hollow, bone-chilling. A voice, not human, not right. "They took him away from you." A chill went through Emily's whole body. Jason was still catching his breath. And when Emily looked away, then she saw where the dog had gone. Standing there in the middle of the street was the husky, staring, still. Like he had been preparing for this moment, like he had known all along. And in that moment, Emily finally found out the truth. They hadn't saved him, they had delivered him. And now, whatever they had released was now coming for them. Emily breathed in quick, jerky gasps. Her hands trembled as she used them to shove herself upright, struggling to regain her balance, feeling so disoriented from the crash. The truck was totaled. The hood was smoking, the windshield shattered. Jason was groaning next to her, trying to sit up. But Emily was not looking at the truck. She wasn't looking at Jason. She was looking at the dog. The husky had planted himself in the middle of the road, head held high, piercing blue eyes trained on something far away. He wasn't hurt. He wasn't afraid. He was waiting. And then he moved, not toward them, toward the trees. Emily's stomach twisted. "Jason!" she choked out. "Get up!" Jason groaned again, shaking his head. "What?" Emily clenched her fists. She wasn't going to wait. She ran, the following. The husky did not stop when Emily called his name. He just kept walking. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she stumbled through the trees, her shoes sinking into wet earth. She had no clue where they were. The road was gone behind them, devoured by darkness. Jason's voice came from behind her, far away, muffled. "Emily, wait!" But she couldn't. The husky was taking her somewhere, and a part of her knew she wasn't getting out of these woods alive if she lost him. The trees closed in around her. The air was thick, still, and then she heard it, a whisper, low, near her ear. "He knows." Emily froze. Her pulse beat hard against her ribs. She pivoted, eyes roaming the trees. Nothing, no one, just darkness. A low growl echoed from ahead of them. Emily's breath hitched. The husky had stopped, body tense, ears pinned back. His eyes weren't on Emily. They were fixed on something behind her. Emily turned slowly, and her blood ran cold. Between the trees, a figure stood tall, motionless, watching. Not human. Emily's lungs wouldn't work. All of her instincts screamed at her to move, to run. But then, it smiled, and the world went dark. The other place. Emily woke up gasping. The air was cold, damp. The stench of rotting wood and damp earth engulfed her lungs. She sat up too quickly, her sight swirling, hands pressed against wet ground. Where was she? Jason, the truck, the road, gone. The husky was seated a few feet away, still, silent, watching. Emily's breath shook. Where are we? The dog didn't move, didn't blink. And then, a voice, deep, hollow, too close. "Welcome back." Emily spun around, and there, just beyond the reach of the dim, blue-tinged light, stood the figure. Its smile widened. Emily's stomach twisted. She had been here before, somewhere deep inside her. She knew. She had never left. The voice oozed into the air, wrapping around Emily's brain like the coils of a snake. She didn't move, couldn't breathe. The figure was just outside the reach of the flickering, phantasmal light, its grin going too wide, its body barely whole. Emily's heart raced and her ears rang. "Back!" she said, barely above a whisper. "I've never been here before." The figure tilted its head, and then it laughed. A low, empty noise like wind blowing through a cemetery. "Haven't you?" A crisp, cold chill traveled down Emily's spine. There was no memory of this place for her, but there was something about the pastiness of the ground under her hands, the way the air stuck to her skin that made her stomach tangle. It was like a word sitting on the end of her tongue. A dream she'd missed the moment she'd opened her eyes. Familiar, but wrong. The husky growled low next to her. Emily's head turned viciously in his direction. He was not growling at the figure. He was growling at her. There was a lump in her throat. "What?" The dog's eyes seared into hers, accusing, waiting, as if he were challenging her to remember. Emily's chest tightened. "I don't understand." The figure smiled wider. "You will." And then she fell off a cliff, the fall. Emily screamed. She was tumbling, the air rushing past her in a blur of blackness. The husky didn't move, didn't follow. He could only watch above, helpless, as Emily fell into the black maw. And then she hit the ground. But she didn't feel pain, didn't feel anything, just cold. Emily gasped for breath in shallow spurts as she pulled herself up. The world had changed. There was no dark night at home. The dark sky had no stars above her, no moon, just an empty nothingness. The air reeked of wet earth and something else, something rotten. Emily turned slowly, and then she saw it, the tree, the same tree where the husky was found. Only now, the rope was still wrapped around it, still waiting. Emily's hands trembled. This was her first time here, but deep in her bones, she knew that was a lie. And then the whispers began. Soft at first, like the wind in dead leaves, but then louder, dozens of voices, hundreds, all saying the same thing. "Put him back." Emily's stomach dropped. And just outside of the tree, the shadow shifted. The rules were never meant to be broken. The shadow was tall, too tall, its limbs disproportionate to its body, its head tilted at a grotesque angle that made Emily's insides churn. She wanted to run, wanted to wake up, but something within her kept saying, "This is not a dream." She had entered into something true, something ancient, something she had broken. The shape stepped forward. The voices grew louder. "Put him back, put him back, put him back." Emily was panting, short and panicked and bursting. "Ike!" The husky barked. Emily spun around. He was there now, standing beside her, but not afraid, not cowering. His gaze was riveted on the figure, and for the first time, Emily understood. She hadn't saved him. She had freed him, and whatever was holding him here had been holding back something else. The rules had never been about locking the dog in. They had been about keeping everything else out. Emily's pulse spiked. The whispers became screams. The shadow lunged. And then, the world ripped apart. The words still rang in Emily's skull like someone had chiseled them into her bones. The world around her was not real. It couldn't be. The sky had become a hollow, infinite void. The ground was too soft, as if it were breathing below her feet. And the tree, the same tree in which they had found the husky, was just as they had left it. Except now, the rope was still there. Emily's pulse pounded. The shadow hadn't moved. It didn't need to. because Emily finally found out. She hadn't saved the dog. She had put out something else. And now, the world wanted balance. The choice. The husky was at her side, silent, immobile, his blue eyes fixed on the shadow, not in fear, in recognition. Emily's stomach twisted. "You knew," she whispered. The dog didn't react, and didn't deny it either. Emily swallowed hard. The ground shifted. The whispers grew louder. "Put him back, put him back, put him back." Emily's breath hitched. "I don't know how." The shadow tilted its head. And then it moved. Not fast, not sudden, just a single step forward. But the entire world seemed to quake. Emily's pulse spiked. She needed to do something. But what? She turned to the husky. "Tell me what to do." He blinked. Then he took a step forward. Emily's throat tightened. The ground underneath her quaked. The tree stood waiting. Emily's mind raced. What if she was wrong? Except, what if putting him back meant killing him? Her hands shook. There has to be another way. The husky didn't move, didn't blink, just waited. And Emily realized this was her choice to make. She inhaled slowly and unsteadily and stepped forward. The sacrifice. The shadow didn't stop her. Neither did the husky. But as soon as she took the rope, everything changed. The whispers stopped. The world went silent. Emily gasped sharply for breath, turned to look at the husky one last time. He just stared, like he already knew what she had decided on, like he had been expecting it. She curled her fingers tightly around the rope. She drew a slow, shivering breath and pulled. The rope tightened. The husky didn't fight, didn't move, didn't even blink. He just let it happen. Emily's vision blurred. The shadow smiled, and then the world collapsed. The return. Emily gasped awake. Cold air, damp earth. She was back. The road stretched out ahead of her. The truck lay crashed in the ditch. Jason was still sprawled beside her, unconscious, but the husky, gone. Emily's stomach dropped. Had it worked? Had she really restored things to how they'd been? She reached into her pocket and caught her fingers on the collar that still remained there, her hands shaking, and when she flipped it over, her heart stopped. The inscription had changed. The old warning was gone. Now it read, "Thank you." Emily's breath hitched. Jason groaned next to her and stirred awake. What happened? Emily didn't answer, because she knew. Balance had been restored. But at what cost? And deep down, she knew this was not the end.